Welcome to the third episode of a podcast of one's own. This session, we're going to talk about the Me Too movement, the impact, the backlash, and the future of it, to be precise. And I'm joined today by Esther, our president, and our secretary, Victoria. Thanks for coming to talk to me today. And yeah, I'm just gonna maybe give us some stats to begin with. So more than 1 in 3 women and nearly 1 in 4 men have experienced sexual violence involving physical contact at some point in their lives, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So you could say it was about time for a global movement against sexual assault and harassment. But the hashtag MeToo only spread virally in October 2017, so 2 years ago. And yeah, I thought we'd talk a bit about why exactly the movement kicked off at that exact point in time. Which was, well, to be fair, the phrase Me Too had been around for almost 10 years before that, because it was originally coined by Tarana Burke. She's an activist for Black women's rights, and she publicized the phrase on her MySpace profile back in 2006. But then obviously the name we associate with the movement is Alyssa Milano, because when the accusations against Hollywood film producer Harvey Weinstein arose back in 2017, she wrote a blog post about it, and she also published it on Twitter. And she said, if all women who have ever been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote Me Too as a status, then we'd give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem. So you could say, and I think it's officially called the Weinstein effect, that sort of like fueled the movement. Yeah. And obviously, there is actually like a Wikipedia entry about the Weinstein effect. It's crazy. Really? And then other examples, obviously, we're not gonna name all the people, but Dustin Hoffman, Ben Affleck, Louis C.K., Kevin Spacey.
Sorry. Trace back? Yeah. To the first 2 names?
Dustin Hoffman and Ben Affleck, yeah. I feel like it's
I always get disappointed about something during these podcasts.
Yeah, like I didn't know that. Damn.
Oh no!
And I mean, it wasn't just in Hollywood. It was also music, sports, politics, and actually a lot of these when these accusations came up.
R. Kelly,
right? Michael Jackson. Not in case of Michael Jackson.
But it all was, it's still, all kind of culminated around the same years, so...
But a lot of powerful men had been immediately removed from their positions.
Yeah.
Right after those accusations. So, yeah, I would... Because obviously the movement has been criticized a lot, but I would still say that it was sort of a milestone in terms of how we talk about sexual assault and harassment.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because, that it was the first time that women were publicly encouraged to speak out about stories that happen in their day-to-day life, and especially in the workplace.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm thinking now, when we were talking about it, we actually didn't mention it in the session, but I can't remember if I'm getting the timeline wrong, but the whole, Kesha sort of, that court case.
Yeah.
When she
was that before or after the Me Too movement started?
I think there was... when it's
it was right, because I was just thinking if that would have kind of been uncovered and been publicized now, that might have not been as much of a struggle for her. In the
I'm not too familiar with the case, but I think she accused her producer.
Yeah, she was stuck to a contract which she couldn't leave, and he had I actually don't know if she came forward saying he had raped her, or if it was just harassment or that. I actually don't know, but I was just thinking about it when you said that a lot of men was just immediately taken down from their powerful positions, and in that case that did not happen. He was just still sat there and defended by so many people, and she was stuck to a contract still working under him while it was happening. And I feel like that might maybe change have changed slightly?
I don't know, because I think the actual court case was after the Me Too movement. But I think the reason, and this may be completely wrong, so don't quote me on this, but I think it wasn't, by the wider community, it wasn't perceived as a Me Too case.
No, exactly, yeah.
Even though Me Too was already a thing, because then I remember my type of circles and my, you know, like, Twitter feed then discussing it as, like, some sort of Me Too case, but then I don't think that reached the wider public, because there was the contract issue, and there was, I think, there was a problem with, not problem, but, like, Kesha had the type of image that people
like,
were
victim
were
blaming.
really,
Wouldn't believe
judgmental of.
But I'm wondering if, well, I guess we'll get to that later on in the discussion, but I'm wondering if the actual impact of the Me Too movement now would have maybe made a difference in terms of policy making and and things like
I think
that.
if you talk about, which is what the sort of Me Too discussion mainly revolved around, sort of higher profile industries like Hollywood, which is also problematic in a way, because if you think about that, Tarana Burke actually started the movement, and she wanted to especially speak about sexual harassment in, like, against black women. And that sort of drowned in the whole discussion about Hollywood. And obviously I'm not saying that wasn't bad either. It's just that was what the media like mainly focused on.
It's
and
probably
what was
why
portrayed,
it was so picked up and so globalized as well, because it was in that industry.
But then it is crazy how it was an open secret in Hollywood, right? Like, everyone in the industry knew.
Yeah.
If you are a young woman and you're making a Harvey Weinstein movie or Woody Allen movie or whatever, that is what's going to happen to you. And then there were people like Angelina Jolie who tried to, like, stir something up or warn other younger women in the industry, and it just didn't work, because those men were so powerful. They had so much influence. They could literally, like, make or break your career. And those young women, they were literally just discouraged from speaking up. They were threatened or paid off to stay quiet.
And then I think it's probably
that was
also,
like the biggest scandal about it, no?
Yeah, it's actually scary how it was so, like, an open secret,
Like
like you're saying, and I think that a lot of, especially younger girls and women that want, like, they want to start their career, and at some point, even though they're aware and even though they're warned, they will hope that it won't happen and be like, oh, but I really want this and I want this career, and, like, I'm willing to put myself in a situation where it might happen, but I'm hoping it won't. You know what I mean? And that's also really dangerous. But it's also dangerous to even discuss it, because people are going to jump on that and say that, oh yeah, so they knew what they were getting into and it was their own fault.
Yeah.
Which is
it's just
total
ridiculous.
garbage.
Crazy,
Did you see that tweet that I shared on, like, the Jamstock Instagram? Because I found it and I was like, I could not believe it. It was literally the whole problem in just 3 tweets, like 3 consecutive tweets. So there was a man saying, for those of you who didn't see it, so there was a man saying, I don't understand why women don't come forward when they've been sexually assaulted. Then a woman commented on that saying, well, because no one believes us. And then another man commented under that saying, I find that hard to believe. And I was like, I mean, come on. So that's the whole problem.
That is
right?
the problem.
Like, no one. I mean, there's several reasons why you don't step forward immediately after you've been sexually assaulted, and that's
the
also
trauma that you have to go through
again,
like,
right?
All these actresses
relive it. Yeah.
People that have to constantly relive it, because then they get asked about it in interviews and in papers and everything, and
it's that and it's being in the court. Like, if it goes to court, you have to
that
go,
must be
like,
so
revisit
hard
it there.
to have to go through. And, like, I know that I'm discovering warm water right now, but sorry, that's an Italian way of saying it. But, like, meaning, like, I know this is obvious, but I think that, especially, like, in Hollywood, because that is such a glamorized lifestyle and position, and if you're in the spotlight, you want to, I guess, one of the reasons why it was so unspoken is because you want to leave the best part of it. Yeah. Because, you have to go through that trauma.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you are in that, like, you know, you are in movies and stuff like that. So maybe you don't want to have to constantly relive it because you want to focus on the good part of it rather than always, because I think that doesn't allow room for personal, you know,
No, it doesn't.
healing and anything like that. That must be so hard.
If you see just like the public response, or when we talk about the whole like Brad Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford case, when literally the president of the United States just tweeted like something along the lines where he was like, oh, if that assault actually happened and that like the accusations she made that happened like 35 years ago or something, if it had actually happened, she would have stepped forward at the time and filed a report. Yeah. So you can actually see how people have no understanding how trauma works and how it affects your life. And if you see, like, if you look at the facts, she was the one, when she stepped forward, and like 3 other women as well, those were the ones who got death threats on a daily basis, and he was still elected to US Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think
so. If you step forward as a woman and you accuse, especially men in powerful position, it puts you in an even more precarious situation than you're already in as a victim. Yeah. So there are so many reasons why women don't come forward and obviously are discouraged from speaking up. So don't go and just blame them.
Underestimate them.
It's actually really interesting that we just briefly mentioned the whole Michael Jackson thing as well, because so many people that I've talked to about that documentary after it came out, what's it called? Leaving Neverland. Said, like, they understood it, but, like, were also hesitant to believe it because it had been so long. And, like, why did they not say anything? And, and these were children.
Yeah.
And so manipulate. Like,
that's the thing. Like, people completely ignore. Manipulative. Yeah. They completely ignore those like huge power imbalance that there obviously is. It's obviously, especially when you have like a child parent or a younger person, an older person situation in a workplace where it might be your boss or whatever, and you literally like you're dependent on that job.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I think people underestimate the use of just picturing yourself in that situation, and go the full length of doing that, because you could say, if I was sexually assaulted, I would immediately go to the police and report it, but then you're not taking into consideration all the circumstances. You're putting yourself and all your privileges in that situation, but you have to strip yourself of those privileges and then put yourself in that situation. Right. Like if a man in power says, if I was sexually assaulted, I would immediately report it, but then you have to counter and be like, but
it wouldn't be
it wouldn't be you. You would be likely a female, likely younger than the person who did it, likely employed by the person who did it.
And there are also like multiple layers to it. So obviously like race plays a role. Yeah. Like people who work low, like jobs that are not paid as well.
Yeah, exactly, and the fear of like not having a safety net to catch you.
Yeah,
I think that's
like
also
trans
important.
Women in the LGBTQ community, they're all like way more exposed.
Yeah,
and I think that's the whole problem about Me Too, sort of just focusing on those high-profile industries, because obviously it is encouraging if like famous people step forward and they sort of lead the way, but then we have to move on from that. We have to talk about stuff that just normal people deal with on a daily basis.
What I think was good with the fact that it happened in like the celebrity on a celebrity scene was just completely separate from what it was actually about, but I think it did make people consider the entertainment industry in a bit of a different light.
Yeah.
Like, it looks like all glamour and amazing and people want to be there and they want to be famous and they want to do that. But this kind of put another sort of spotlight on it where you're like, okay, but there's still people and they're still struggling with the same sort of power dynamics.
Yeah.
Which I think is like a healthy perspective to gain on the celebrity culture.
Yeah. But just in terms of seeing how, like, just seeing the response. So when I think about the Kevin Spacey case, for example, not only did it show, which was really important, that men obviously can be victims of sexual assault as well, but also Netflix, they immediately kicked him off the show. And I mean, House of Cards, he was the main character. It was a huge, the show was a huge success. And people were like, oh, well, it won't work without Kevin Spacey. They just killed his character off. They were like,
I remember watching, like, going from one episode to the other, and he was just dead.
He was just,
It was just like, no,
it was
just like...
It was just like, bye. Yeah, so the movement has been criticized by a lot of people for sort of lacking a purpose. Because some people found it hard to see how just women talking about their experience would actually change something. They were like, yeah, well, okay, we see that sexual assault takes place, that it is a thing, but
yeah, they're like, are we just wallowing in this trauma now?
Right?
Or,
yeah, like, where do we go from here? And I thought that was quite interesting, because if you listen to those who sort of initiated the movement, Tarana Burke and Alyssa Milano, they defined the purpose clearly.
Yeah.
Like, they were saying, we need to have laws and policies, we need to educate people, we need to raise awareness, we need to let people know how to file complaints if something happens at school or at work.
Yeah.
There need to be offices or places where they can turn to, where they get information. This is what's going to happen. The law needs to change. So when we're talking about jobs, certain sort of like barriers to enter the job, like non-disclosure agreements, which you often have to sign, they have to be removed, and the whole sort of process for disciplinary action just has to be quicker. So it's not like they didn't define the purpose of the movement. And I think another, like, the main thing was just to give people access to resources and sort of healing. And I think often the whole impact, like the power of stories, is just underestimated a lot, because obviously we want the laws to change, we need policies in place and everything, but the first step is to just realize that you're not alone, and that it's not something that only affects you, or maybe you think you've done something wrong, you did something to encourage this sort of behavior. So the first step is obviously speaking out about it, and then we can talk about what can actually change.
Yeah, I think as well, for people that come forward or are hesitant to come forward, it's not only about thinking that you did something wrong or like victim blaming yourself. I think a lot of it is also like a fear of coming forwards and then just being deemed as a broken person. And I think that's where the Me Too movement really made a difference, because for celebrities to step forward, like public figures to step forward and saying, this happened to me, but I'm gonna continue working, I'm gonna continue being a fully functioning person and not let that define me. I think that is really important, and something that can filter down to us normal people that are not in the entertainment industry. Like, it doesn't have to just that you come forward doesn't mean that you're like a broken.
Yeah, and I think what you guys were saying, the idea of not being alone, and part of maybe the purpose of the Me Too movement is in its own way to create a support system, a support net for those who can't find it elsewhere. And why not? Like, why is that? Yeah. Why is that a bad thing? And maybe from that support net, building the strength and the community to then go on and make policies and make laws and create the next generation of policymakers and lawmakers, and then we'll go up and change the situation. Why not?
I mean, it's too much to ask for a whole culture, for the whole culture we have, where just sexual violence against women especially is just so normal. We're not going to change that within a year or two.
Exactly.
That's way too much to ask. But I think we talked a bit about the law in the session as well, and I think especially when you look at Ireland, like the referendum that happened in 2018, where they sort of abolished the 8th Amendment, where basically what was said in that amendment was that abortion is just legal in every single case. So if you were raped, it's illegal. If you've a serious physical medical condition that still threatens illegal. Your life, it's still illegal, and you could be sent to prison for 14 years. And then when you look at, because when they abolished that law, it was just the vast majority voted against it. And later they asked the people who didn't want that law anymore. They were like, oh, what persuaded you? And 43% of them said that what actually swayed their vote was stories of people and people they didn't know as a person. So it wasn't like, oh, my sister told me that. It was the whole Me Too movement thing, that people realized that the majority of women experience that sort of violence on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And the worst case obviously is rape. So we cannot let that happen.
I think it's very dangerous to try and capitalize on the Me Too movement, because that's not what it's there for.
Yeah. It's
not there to, like, it is there to make a change, but the change cannot be made without stories, without collaboration, without a community. That's how humans work. We are social animals. Like,
I think the stories create a space for the fact, like, even the fact that it became a hashtag and that it has a name. The movement has a name. Me Too movement. I think that's really important and shouldn't underestimate that actually facilitates conversation. Even me thinking that this is something that I can actually talk about with, like, adult men in my life, where I feel like a few years ago, if I would have started talking about sexual abuse against women in the workplace, they would have been like, what have you experienced? Oh my god, what the fuck is happening? Like, they would have immediately thought that this is something very specific that suddenly, like, but if having a name of the movement actually puts the conversation on the table for everyone, like, we can discuss this without it being a personal issue. I mean, it is a personal issue for almost everyone, but
the person is always political. That's another thing. We just have to keep that in mind. So let's talk a bit about the backlash against the whole movement, because when we're talking about, obviously we see laws are changing, the whole hashtag Time's Up movement in the States obviously changed the law there, and then we can also see laws in Europe change, but it still obviously remains very difficult to win a case in court, especially when the assault happened years ago, and you're asked to provide solid evidence, to quote Melania Trump, if you accuse a man, which is obviously going to be difficult after decades. So let's quickly talk about this study that I found. It's a very recent study by Leon Atwater from 2019. And so what the study found is that 20 to 25% of the men who were interviewed admitted to avoid contact with women or situations where they are alone with women in the workspace due to Me Too. 50% of the men claimed to fear false accusation, and 25% said they wouldn't even hire a woman for that reason.
Sorry, how much was that percentage again?
The last one? Yeah. 25% would not hire a woman for the reason.
It's a quarter of employers.
Because
of male
employers. But obviously those are the ones in the positions to actually hire people.
Who aren't male employers.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what's the whole false accusation? I mean, is it a thing or is it not? Because
there's going to be the
occasional case, but, like, the fact that
it's not that popular. And the fact that we're willing to, like, completely ignore those statistics, ignore those percentages, because, I'm too scared. And I get that it's hard for people to realize their mistakes and decide to change. That's all another whole philosophical thing. But maybe have the decency to step back and say, wait a second, if I'm afraid to behave in a certain way because it could be perceived as harmful, maybe I shouldn't behave that way.
Yeah.
Like, is that so hard to get your head around? Like, I get that it's hard to have your entire system crushed before your eyes because you just so love... Sorry, I'm gonna get very angry right now. Yeah. You love so much harassing young women in your workplace, and now you're not willing to hire them anymore. And sorry, that breaks your poor little heart. But maybe, like, just think about it for 5 minutes and, maybe I'm not the center of the entire universe. Maybe I'm harming somebody else. And we are allowed to change. We are allowed to, think about our past mistakes and think, oh, wait, I actually behaved quite badly up until now. But this movement has made me realize that maybe...
Yeah,
I should. That's not bad. That's not a bad thing. You are allowed to.
We were talking about the sort of like the hashtag that came after or during Me Too, which was I did that, or
I don't know about
something
that.
It was
a lot of
hashtag
men
I
came
did
forward and they
that.
were like, I actually did that,
Yeah.
and I now recognize that it was wrong, and I want to do
Yeah.
better. And like we had quite a long discussion about it in the session, about the good and the bad with that movement. Like, it's good that men actually come forward and say it because it holds them accountable,
Yeah.
and it shows that they're actually learning something and recognizing things. But at the same time, there's also the part where it's like, why do you have to take up that space and put your own, like, put yourself there when we're actually trying to listen
Yeah.
to the women right now?
And I get that, but I think hashtags like that and movements like that, they can make a really positive impact in showing that none of us is perfect.
Yes.
And people make big mistakes. Some people make bigger
Yeah.
mistakes than others.
And there has to be a possibility to
Rehabilitate
redemption,
yourself
right,
in
yeah.
society.
Yes.
There's actually a good episode about this on this show that I like, which is called The Bold Type, and it's on Amazon. And it's very like, somebody called it H&M feminist, which I think it's a hilarious
Yeah,
type
that's
of
funny.
because
Yeah.
it is H&M feminism, but it also talks about really good topics. And one of the male writers in this New York type of vibe situation realizes that he's the subject of one of these Me Too articles that one of his college girlfriends wrote.
Yeah.
And she talks about this guy who like assaulted her, and he's like, oh, that's so bad.
But
and
she
she's
doesn't
like,
say any names.
yeah, and
okay.
he messaged her being like, oh my god, that's so bad, that I'm so sorry that happened to you. And
he's
she's
"It
like,
was
do you not realize that was you? And so there's a whole, I would recommend watching it, because there's a whole part about him having to come to from first the anger of saying, no, I didn't do that was just in your mind, and then like slowly realizing that, wait, actually
I did that,
I did
and I
that.
didn't even see that it was a problem at the time.
Owning
Yeah.
up for his action, facing the consequences of his actions, because it's online, but then also thinking, okay, well, maybe this isn't actually about me. This isn't my space to be angry that she accused me. This is my space to let her heal and let her have her process, while acknowledging that I made a mistake and I'm allowed to, move on forward.
We were watching at the start of the session as well. We were watching Justin
Baldoni.
Justin Baldoni's one of his table talks for Man Enough, and it was on the Me Too movement, and they were one of the guests, I can't remember his name right now, but he said that I didn't realize that it was so common within my female friends, because no one ever talked to me about it. And then it dawned on me that they probably just did not feel comfortable talking about it with me. And that made me realize that I also needed to change the way that I behaved. If I came across to my female friends as someone that they can't trust with this, then I need to check what about me makes them feel uncomfortable talking about this.
Makes them unsafe. Just to quickly come back to the whole...
Sorry, I completely
Tangent.
No, that's quite alright. I just wanted to wrap the whole false accusation thing up by saying that there seems to be this sort of public anxiety about it actually being a huge thing.
Yeah.
While when you look at the statistics, they suggest that only 4% of the cases who are reported, right? Not all of those who happen, but those who are reported, are suggested to be false. And
I mean, that would drop
in the UK
even
and then,
more if every single person, like the amount of people that don't report are still so many.
And you also have to keep in mind that the police obviously have a lot of pressure to lower their crime rates, right? Yeah. So sometimes when they close a case, it's just say it's no crime, they just do that to remove like a difficult case from the statistics.
Yeah.
So maybe the actual number is even lower. So we're talking about 4% here.
Less than 4, like, so...
It's really, like, the evidence completely fails to support this sort of anxiety that there is. I remember Donald Trump saying, oh, it's a scary time for men. And I was like...
Is it though?
What are you on about? I'm sorry, but do you walk home at night with your keys between your fingers and never listen to music because you're afraid someone's just gonna... jump
or
out
having
of the
to
bush?
have like somebody
or
on
do
the
you have
phone.
anxiety going to work every day because you
Right.
know that you're stuck there, but you don't know what, like, you're not comfortable in the environment. You have to go there every day.
Quit.
How many of
because
us
you need the money.
have found themselves to be in an extremely uncomfortable, borderline dangerous situation at work?
I can't even.
Absolutely, I can't
Like,
even.
I worked at a bar for like 3 years.
I worked
so...
at a hardware store and it happened to me. Like, in the broad daylight, in front of a 16-year-old coworker,
Yeah.
Like, and I felt unsafe. Like, that's absolutely like, mental.
Yeah.
And you're gonna focus on the 4%, which is like a very
But that was what dominated the whole discourse for so long, and I got so upset just seeing it. It made me really angry. And I think, I mean, obviously it's a thing, it's happened before. It's just the first time in like history pretty much that women actually have that power to falsely accuse someone, and that could be a thing, and that's obviously scary for men. But maybe we can then talk about, like, criticize those cases instead of just undermining a whole movement.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it's
learn
also
from
like
them
it's not difficult to avoid. Like, just be a decent human being, and no one's gonna accuse you for having assaulted them if you have. If you don't do it, it's fine. You're safe. Just don't do it. And if you're a nice person, why would anyone, even those less than 4%, would not want to go after you? You know what I mean? Like, it's
not just in the workplace. It's also when men sort of claim that Me Too has ruined dating. Like, Me Too has killed romance, right? We've heard it so many times, and they're like, oh, I don't even know how to act around women anymore because maybe I'm going to be called a rapist. And you're just kind of like,
only way you can act around women is predatory, then
maybe don't
check yourself.
Be creepy or don't do anything inappropriate.
Use this as room for improvement then. Maybe then you won't need to date this much because people will actually want to stick around with you.
But when we asked the guys who were there for the session, I literally asked them, I was like, how do you feel? Do you feel like after Me Too it's impossible to date women? And they were like, no. Not really.
No, because they're decent guys.
I know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, okay, just as a last point, obviously we talked a bit about the backlash in the media and mainly from men and bosses. But then also there was a sort of a feminist backlash against the movement. Like, there was criticism coming from feminists, and I just quickly want to talk about the most popular, like, 2 points that they make. So the first one being that Me Too sort of places harmless experiences like catcalling or when someone hits on you in a club on the same level with rape, and therefore actually plays down the experience or like the trauma of rape victims.
I think
first of all, I just want to say, like, no one, like, no, it doesn't take away from that. Like, I just don't understand. First of all, it doesn't put it on the same. It does not put it on the same level. No one's saying that someone catcalling someone is worse than an instance of rape. Like, no one is saying that. I don't understand that.
But also, people are allowed to feel and process things that happen to them in the way that they want to. Yes. Like, if being catcalled has actually made a very strong impact on my mental health,
and feeling
then
safe.
why shouldn't
Especially
I
if it's
talk
a reoccurring
about it?
Thing, right?
Exactly.
Like,
then why shouldn't I be allowed to say, you know what? Hey. And I don't think it's not a fight between horrible things. It's a support between people who have experienced things that may be worse, things that may be a bit less.
But it's like, who are you to say
like what trauma is for someone else?
What trauma means to me, like what kind of trauma I've experienced. And then also I feel like people don't really understand that it's what you were saying in the session. It's sort of a pyramid, and obviously the peak of that pyramid would be rape, but then the foundation of that is just that, like, if the normalization of just that sexual violence and that abuse that happens to women.
And we don't need to, like, hit rock bottom to actually call out the whole culture.
Do they not think
we want to prevent that?
It's part of the same system, right?
Yeah. If we have a zero tolerance for any type of quote-unquote low level of harassment, then it won't get to rape.
Exactly.
Because we'll catch it before.
Right.
But, like, I also think it's important to, what you guys said, you can't define what trauma is to someone else. But then I also want to add that, like, we've all been catcalled, and I'm not saying that I walk around being traumatized by that. Like, I hate it, but it has not, like, you know, that's the fact that I don't feel like I need to go to therapy for being catcalled does not mean that it's okay that I am.
That is-
You know
that
what I mean? Like,
happens.
I don't
of
have to
course,
be
like-
severely traumatized for it to be wrong.
That's exactly like I may be just like just annoyed at something.
Yeah, like,
and
that
want to
makes
say,
me
"You know
angry,
what?
but I
Like,
don't walk
just don't
around
do
having
that."
anxiety about it.
Yeah.
But it's the same, it's like, just because you murder someone with a shot in the back of their head and they don't realize they're murdered, it's not okay. You know what I mean? Like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, there've also been valid points made by some feminists, including Tarana Burke, who started the whole movement, and she was sort of saying that she feels like the voices of marginalized groups, like sex workers or victims of sex trafficking, who are often seen as legitimate targets for sexual abuse, they're being excluded from the discourse.
Yeah.
We have to talk more about violence against queer women and trans women, and especially Black women. But she encouraged those groups. She was like, "This is your movement too. Please don't give up. Don't drop out just because it's rough. It's gonna get rough."
Yeah.
And we knew that from the beginning. So maybe we're gonna close the podcast on that note, just
Yes.
saying,
It's your movement too.
it's everyone's movement. Don't feel discouraged if people, want to tell you, want to define your trauma, want to define your experience for you, because you know what you've experienced, and don't underestimate the power of stories.
Yeah.
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 And what, one last thing, what was actually what Tranenberg said, that it's a movement, not a moment.
That's
So,
the
like,
main thing.
it's going on.
Yeah.
Kind of.
It's
Yeah.
a process, and we only just started talking about it. It's like, because people are like, "Oh, it's been 2 years. Aren't we done with this?" I'm like, "No,
It's
Hell
just
no.
starting.
It should have been
Just
much more than
started.
2 years.
Yeah. So yeah, keep talking about what happened.
Keep talking, sharing.
Keep talking, keep listening to the podcast. Yes. And we're looking forward to our next session on Tuesday, which is going to be on...
Gender and games.
Is it gender games or...
Maybe.
Elective
No, it's not gender and games. Sorry. It's on the...
It's
it's called The Reluctant Feminist.
Mm.
It's about maybe handling... what do you say? Your, like, internal resistance to... engaging with the movement.
To identifying with that sort of label. Yeah. Oh. Okay, so that's going to be interesting. So come along if you've paid your membership fee. And we're looking forward to seeing you. Bye.
Bye.